There's nothing more terrifying when you're 8 years old than hearing the opening chords of the Phantom of the Opera overture at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. The Phantom of the Opera is there inside my mind every Saturday morning. Oh, my mother would blast the song from our stereo, feeling the music from the speakers, windows rattling, beats pulsing. In hindsight, I'm sure my mother did have a phantom inside her mind. And singing along with Christine and the Phantom, her voice carrying with every note and every word, it was the only way she could let us know. You see, my mother is a performer, a gifted and talented performer. She's a storyteller, a musician, and a psychic. She's anything and anyone she needs to be to please an audience. She's a shapeshifter, a chameleon. In the short time we shared a household, I saw her become 1,000 variations of herself, and each time the Phantom was there. When her mind told her she was no longer equipped for the workforce, the Phantom was there. He whispered the plan into her ear, delivering a solution to her unhappiness like an invisible dealer spoon-feeding her uppers she didn't know she needed. "I need you to break my hand," she told me and my brother, offering us the pink-handled hammer from the do-it-herself toolkit. "I can't go back to work today. I can't do this anymore." I felt the weight of the tool in my small, pudgy, childish hand and considered fulfilling her request, my brother denying her immediately. Her eyes were glaring, pleading, crazed. "I don't think I can do this. I never asked you for anything." Her voice suddenly sounding unfamiliar. "Please do this one thing for me. Just break it. Do it." "I'm sorry. I can't," I finally responded weakly. "Absolutely worthless," she murmured to herself as she finished getting ready for what she hoped would be the last day of work. Later that afternoon, the Phantom would convince her to complete the job herself. As she gathered her things from the trunk of her Subaru, the vision was clear, drawing the plan in her mind like a football coach explaining the X's and O's. Her wrist was broken in 2 places when she returned home that night. The mind can be a very powerful tool. It can convince you to spend 4 hours at a casino, tauntingly demanding the next pull of the slot will yield a jackpot. It can convince you to show your children a randomly selected gravesite where you introduce their brother and then deny the event years later. The mind can co-sign a scheme to appear at your neighbor's doorstep with broken glass in your hair, pleading for refuge from an abusive husband who never touched you and was, in fact, miles away. It can drive a wedge between the strongest, tightest relationships you ever built, forcing words from your hand in your mouth you signed to anonymously and break hearts with the slightest of ease. The mind can do anything without ever looking back. The Phantom returned to my mother in the forms of diseases never truly diagnosed. Self-medicated, she grew pale and yellow as she began refusing meals and restricting her diet. Her list of ailments grew despite lack of medical proof. We cried together as she convinced me she was nearing the end. In the last 14 years, my mother has called me in tears with the same speech 8 additional times. I stopped crying long ago, as if my emotions simply dried up. My compassion a modern dust bowl, an empty well. The fault does not fall on her alone. She's learned to twist and contrive any story and any lie the same way that you or I turn our pillows in our sleep when our eyes are closed but our minds know exactly what we're doing. She cannot fight her compulsion to create these tales and fables. And she's relentless in her desire to feed, but no, not to feed her children, to feed her hate and to feed her greed. The demons she fights inside do not have names or faces, yet she bows to their commands, her mind breaking both her spirit and her soul. My greatest fear has always been hating or becoming my mother, and I don't necessarily want to do either. We're nearly exact opposites, sharing only genetics and love. While she's determined to stay a child, I was forced to mature in the blink of an eye, a vanishing act of my childhood. While she searched for acceptance and love through every story she told and wove, I stepped back from the spotlight, choosing instead to observe and absorb. And yet through it all, she's still my mother. The Phantom does not define who she is or who she was. Her struggle is not the only part of her, but it is a part of her story. It's a part of my story as well. Indirectly, her experiences taught me my most cherished lessons. She taught me the power of stories and how stringing together emotions and words can feel both magical and musical. She taught me to love music, to sing and dance every Saturday morning when the house is a mess, but I'm happy. And most importantly, she taught me to look for the struggle in the eyes of strangers, knowing too well the phantom can work and take hold of anyone's mind, and we need only to be kind. Thank you.